Cloudflare Workers has been one of the greatest innovation, I would say, for running your serverless compute, and now it is not the only one in the field. Yesterday, Vercel ship happened, and they have announced something which I feel is incredibly important for every developer who's running any sort of serverless workload to pay attention at least. So they announced a bunch of things in Vercel ship, but two of them really that stand out were the bot ID one and the active CPU pricing for me. Let's quickly understand both of them in detail to actually appreciate what's going on the Vercel side. So in order to demonstrate this a little bit better, let me actually show you how exactly it makes difference on a business level. So right now I'm inside Fermion, which is one of the products that we work on, and we have a mixed usage of AI and things here and there. And let me actually show you, like, one of the usage over here is for creating coding labs, right? So let me just go to coding labs, create a new IO lab and test lab. Let's say I create this lab. Now, as somebody who's setting up a coding lab, what I can use is use Fermion AI Copilot to do that. So I can talk with this AI agent and it'll respond. Now, what you're seeing over here, working on a response and streaming response, you see that it takes a little bit of time for, AI to respond, send query, get data back, and so on. So if I ask it, how are you? If you pay attention again, you will see that it takes working on a response. It takes like a couple of seconds. I mean, it's faster right now because chat is not very complex or it does not have to do a lot of things. But what's going to happen is the moment I send, let's say if I send a request, hello, to the AI agent, it is executed on my server over here, which then calls, let's say, OpenAI endpoint, right? And OpenAI takes its own time for responding, like a few seconds and so on. They send the response and then I send maybe like do some little bit of processing over here and then I send it back to the client, right? So over here, even though the whole process is technically taking us, let's say, 3 to 5 seconds of time, there is a second concept which most people don't know, that there is also a concept of CPU time, right? So these 3 to 5 seconds of time is what we call as wall time, right? Wall time is basically if you look at the clock on the wall and actually see like how much seconds it has elapsed, that is what you call as a wall time. The same thing actually exists for CPU time as well. So CPU time is actually the time that your CPU is burning on doing some sort of task, right? And CPUs are efficient, right? So they would be switching between multiple tasks, multiple processes. If something is waiting on IO, for example, this network request, my server, for example, when it makes this request to OpenAI endpoint, it has nothing to do until and unless OpenAI responds. Then it will, copy the response into memory, do all those sort of things. So CPU time usually is very less compared to your typical wall time, right? In order of a few milliseconds. So what happens generally is that most serverless infrastructure providers, including the most popular ones like AWS Lambda, for example, they will charge you wall time. The amount of time it takes for them to run your compute is where they would charge you, which seems fair, right? Because obviously, in general, if you think about it, you might be thinking that, hey, I would probably, if I'm using 3 to 5 seconds of time, I am renting their compute for that time, right? So I would be charged on this. Well, the thing is that this is actually not fully true, because what you can do is I don't know if Cloudflare was the pioneer in this. They created this as the first technology. But what Cloudflare realized that, hey, when we have something like a bunch of computers, right? Because Cloudflare is running at scale. So they have like probably millions of requests per second coming in, right? Which all of these compute containers are targeting. So let's say we just have these CPU 1, CPU 2, CPU 3, and CPU 4 over here on Cloudflare's infrastructure. So what Cloudflare says is that, okay, if I have something like this, and if it's serving like, let's say, hundreds of requests or millions of requests rather every second, what these companies are able to do is share the CPU resources among requests, right? So it will almost act as if like there is a one big CPU that's there, like Cloudflare Compute. And whenever there is some sort of IO happening, this CPU, for example, if it was serving this request initially, request 1, and this request goes into IO, then this CPU can go ahead and serve this other request over here, right? So it does not have to wait dedicatedly on that one request which is waiting on IO. Now this IO could be network call, it could be file system read, or write or whatever, which is basically something that operating system can delegate and it does not has to actively consume your CPU, right? So this is an optimization that Cloudflare recognized. Again, I'm not sure if Cloudflare was the first provider to do this, but what they did is that they created a service called as Cloudflare Workers. Now, Cloudflare Workers is a very interesting service because instead of billing you on the seconds you are spending, it bills you on the CPU you are exhausting, right? So it's consuming milliseconds or whatever, a second of time. That is where they will bill you. And it is guaranteed that your CPU time would always be less than your wall time, because obviously physically would not make sense for your CPU to spend more time than your wall time, if and only if, for example, if you're using a single core CPU. If you're using multi-core CPU, then obviously you can have like multiple CPUs running parallelly and so on. But the thing is, even in multi-core, you might, say that, hey Mehul, you just told that multi-core CPUs might have an advantage on AWS Lambda. That is not true, because in AWS Lambda, you are also built on the memory that you use, right? So the more the memory, the more cores they give you, but the price also increases per invocation. So Cloudflare works like this, which is what we realized. Now, Vercel has also shifted their serverless compute on the same pricing model. That is the big thing, because not only this, because see, we already had, it's not like Cloudflare Workers is the only thing that exists now on CPU time. There is also Dino deploy, if I'm not wrong. That also works on CPU time, if I'm not wrong. And there is also Bunny's scripts. So Bunny is a CDN, which also offers the similar functionality on their own CDN. I don't know any more. Maybe there are more players in the space that offer wall time, CPU time based execution. But these are the three players which I know. And now finally there is a Vercel, which is also a good company in terms of developer experience. I won't say like I have been their fan of pricing, but this is a very welcome step in the right direction. And the reason this is also unique is because in case of Vercel, this is a real Node.js environment, right? So this is actually pretty interesting, because even in case of Bunny, I think they use Dino, which is restricted in terms of what you can do in their environment. And Cloudflare Workers is a very restricted JavaScript engine, right? So you cannot do a lot of things which you would be able to do in Node. So Vercel's environment is real Node.js environment. That is number one thing. Number two is that their pricing is now from active CPU time. So this is extremely good. The third thing is that their active CPU is starting at almost like 10, 12 cents, 13 cents per hour, right? So if we only compare this per hour to Cloudflare's pricing, you're going to see Cloudflare's pricing starts at 2 cents per additional million CPU milliseconds. So we'll have to do a little bit of conversion here. 2 cents per million CPU milliseconds, right? So if we convert this would be $2 per million CPU seconds, if I'm not wrong. No, it'll be $20 actually. And now if we convert a million CPU seconds into hours, so it'll be 278 hours roughly, and that would be 278. So it'll be 0.0719, so approximately 0.072 per hour, right? So Vercel is a little bit expensive compared to Cloudflare Workers, right? But it's still like, it's worth it to have at least a competitor in the similar space, even if you are slightly expensive, right? I'm not considered the invocation cost. For example, Cloudflare has that, and Vercel also has a provision memory cost. So Vercel will probably be slightly more expensive than this also, but it's still worth having a real competitor in the space, because for example, if you don't like Cloudflare as a service, but you have to use Cloudflare Workers as one of their products, where do you go? You don't have any place to go, because AWS Lambda will just rob you in daylight, and any other provider which might not suit your requirement is out of the picture. So this is extremely good. I honestly don't know how they are doing it, because I know for a fact that Vercel actually builds a lot of their services on top of AWS Lambda. And even if you are doing AWS Lambda, you still are paying for wall time for every execution of a user that you're doing, right? So I don't know if Vercel is doing some voodoo magic under the hood to even inside a Lambda itself, it's able to run multiple executions somehow. But if they're doing that, that is going to be a, engineering gem in itself, right? So because it's hard to achieve that if they're trying to reprogram AWS Lambda in such a way that they're able to exploit running multiple code on a single Lambda. I don't know if it even makes sense or not, but this is a good start. But obviously you have to remember that I'm pretty sure that this does not include costs for bandwidth that you are incurring, the data that you are sending. So maybe that's not a big enough cost component for you at, if you're running serverless compute in general. But one of the things which I know for a fact that on Cloudflare, the bandwidth is free even on workers, right? So even if your worker is generating some data and sending it down the line, that bandwidth is included in this. Whereas in Vercel, I know for a fact that it would be priced at some bandwidth rate. I like Vercel. We are customers of both Cloudflare and Vercel, but I genuinely think that their platform would be much, much more affordable in future as they grow and as they become a little bit more independent from AWS. Because I know for a fact a lot of Vercel's pricing hikes actually come from AWS, which has notoriously high pricing for a lot of these services like bandwidth, even storage. I would say like there are so many better options now available which are much cheaper than AWS. But yeah, this is like a step in good direction. So what do you think about this? Do let me know in the comments if you watched Vercel ship, and what do you think about this active compute pricing. That is all for this one, and I will see you in the next video very soon.